terms of the physical composition, one thing I'll say about Dylan is, yeah, I mean, he is a large guy. His dad was an offensive lineman, so Dylan's not going to be, 5'11", skinny guy. And Rule made the point that like larger guys are durable in the NFL, and that's absolutely right. And so Dylan's tough. We talked about this before in terms of the work ethic and the toughness. All that stuff's there. He did not miss. I think he missed 3 plays because of an injury against UCLA. It may not even been 3, 1 or 2. I don't know. It was a weird situation. It was more than that. He tried to come back in, then he realized he couldn't.
Yeah.
But he talked to us after every game. This is a tough guy. So it's not about that. It's about making sure that you're running the offense that best fits what he can do. I would like to see a little bit of tempo in that way, and we will talk to Holgorsen on Thursday, and that'll be an interesting conversation because that's probably something we'll ask is, granted, it's not just the kinds of plays that you choose to run, it's the speed with which you run them and how quickly you want to try to get to those things. And is that an advantage that you want to have? Or do you want to continue to run kind of a slower pace so that you can control a football game and keep your defense fresh? I think that'll be something that's worth watching. In my opinion, it's possible that a faster pace, a quicker tempo might benefit Raiola. Like if one of his advantages is that he is a fast processor and he's a quick thinker on the field, then you want to put that guy in a scenario where he's running the offense at a quicker tempo than the defense can adjust to because he can handle that. Anytime that you do that, and I don't know if Nebraska's planning that, you have to have receivers who can run 5, 6, 7 plays in a row too, and not just from a stamina standpoint. They got to know the plays. And so it shapes the way that you pick your receivers. And one of the things that Scott Frost ran into back when he got back here is there were guys they wanted to put on the field because they were super talented. They were not very effective at running 5 or 6 plays in a row. And I'll never forget, he inserted one of the fastest receivers on the team into the game against Northwestern, and everybody knew he was getting the ball because why else would he be in the game? Like he hadn't played all game. And so those are some of the things that you watch for if you're thinking about tempo and what Dylan Raiola might do. We'll see. The other thing that's really interesting to me about this team, and we'll talk to John Butler next week and maybe some assistant coaches after that. What's really interesting to me, Evan, is their amount of commitment to being great on defense includes having an associate head coach in Phil Snow, having a coordinator level secondary coach in Addison Williams, obviously John Butler. They have 2 defensive line coaches. They are putting a lot of staff effort into being really good on defense. Like you don't deploy that level of resources to that side of the ball unless the intention is to be elite. And I'm curious if they have the players on hand to achieve that.
Yeah, I think they are too, probably. And some of the portal additions that they've made are going to go a long way in figuring that out. Again, with Deshaun McCullough and Williams, Waneri, and so many others that are on that side of the ball. The coordinator discussion to me is interesting. I mean, between Mike Eckler at special teams, what Butler's doing on the defensive side, and Holgorsen, like I guess I'm curious. What I'm trying to think about is like why all the extra layers defensively? Is that just because that's where Rule has a background and that's where they were able to hire? Or is that because defense by nature can be more of a collaborative sort of thing and you want your guy on offense to be the guy? You don't want multiple cooks in the kitchen. Like we've talked about that a lot through the years with multiple Nebraska staffs about too many cooks in the kitchen, right? And how that kind of dilutes things. Do you think, I'm curious what your thoughts are, having covered a lot of those previous regimes too, like, is that a positive? Are we saying that could be a positive defensively because of all that experience? And is that by nature, is that different from what maybe they're looking at offensively with one guy in Holgorsen who's leading the show?
Yeah, I think they want to be dominant on that side of the ball. I think it can be a positive to have that level of expertise on that side of the ball. That's probably what they're going for. And of course, Rule knows that side of the ball as well. And so, like, I think there's just an intentionality about wanting to be really, really good. And it's not that I don't think that they've got good players. I think there's a combination of ability and athleticism, and then you sync that up with experience and know how. You have to make sure that your most talented players can also execute the schemes that you're asking them to execute, and you have to put them in positions to make plays. And so I think one of the more interesting things that you're going to see this, because they changed most of the defensive staff, and some of that was because the guys left. Some of that was John Butler was promoted. So there's a variety of things to look at there. But the reality is they just want to get a little bit better on that side of the ball. Frankly, maybe a lot better. Like it's hard to say because of course they had a good defense in some ways last year. I mean, they did. I mean, they had what you would call, I guess, a top 25 defense in some ways. But if you look at what, I don't know exactly what Rule's process is of like what stats he's looking at. But in 2023, if you look at yards per play, Nebraska was 7th in the country. 7th. 4.62 yards per play. Right? 7th.
Really good. Yep.
2024, Nebraska was not 7th. They were 52nd. And that's something that kind of escaped our attention. Now, here's what's also interesting, Evan. Nebraska gave up 317 yards per game this season in 2024. 2023, they only gave up 14 fewer yards. But it was a whole different kind of defense. It was way better. And that was kind of a hidden thought process. Like, they didn't get a lot better in the red zone. They didn't get a lot better on third down, and they gave up too many explosive plays. And some of that was because the secondary was not often on the same page. You can think about the big play against Illinois early in that game. You can think about, the bust that Tommy Hill had. You can think about the big plays against USC and UCLA and Indiana and Wisconsin. Wisconsin hit some bombs. The 80-yard play against Iowa. I mean, that was a ludicrous play that mostly involved missed tackles, but like it was still a giant play. And so like when people talk about, well, how good was the 2024 defense and did it really get much worse? Well, what I can tell you is that defense in 2024 ranked lower in yards per play allowed than the 2021 defense that had Eric Chinander as the defensive coordinator and played a murderer's row of opponents. Like way, way better schedule. We're talking about a Michigan State team that averaged whatever they did, 30 points a game, and Nebraska held them. Oklahoma, Michigan, Ohio State, good Minnesota team, like all these things. And so, like, when you start digging into the stats, I think they probably came out of last year with a real sense of frustration about what that could have been and what it wasn't. It just wasn't good enough. And so, like, my sense is they want to go back to the defense they were 2 years ago. And that's going to take some effort when the majority of the guys we're talking about here, Evan, are new. Like John Bullock isn't there. Ty Robinson's not there. Nash Huntmaker's not there. Jamari Butler's gone. Obviously Quentin Newsom's not around anymore. The guys that got it done that year are not here. A lot of them aren't. A few of them are. A few of them, not very many. I mean, Buford was hurt. Hartzog, Singleton got hurt.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, if you start charting it that way, like they have a lot of room to grow. And so I think that's part of the thought process is let's put everything that we can toward getting back to that defense, because if they can get back to that defense, the offense can be pretty good. It doesn't have to be great, and they'll win 8 or 9 games. That's exactly what they needed the first year that Rule was here. And the reality is the offense was really bad and historically bad. They can be just pretty good this year. And if they have the defense they had from 2023, they're going to win a lot of games.
Well, the other thing too, like offensively, you can kind of map out how it's going to look. You know who the quarterback is. You generally have an idea on the offensive line and who the receivers are going to be. I think defensively, like maybe the depth of talent is better, but how it comes together is much more up for grabs. I mean, you talk about the defensive line. resetting with some guys who were good sort of secondary type players last year. Riley Van Poppel, Keona Davis, can those guys kind of make the next step? Uh, Middle linebacker, can Vincent Shavers hold up over a full season and do what he did in his breakout freshman year? Marquise Watson-Trent, does Javen Wright fit in there? Like there's you have some things to figure out there. And then certainly more than anywhere else on the team in the secondary, you have so much depth that you can tinker in all kinds of ways. I mean, you can because Deshaun Singleton came back and Malcolm Hartzog came back and Marquise Buford came back, then that suddenly means that those younger guys who in a different universe could be starters, like Amari Sanders or whomever, they're suddenly rotational guys. And then you factor in the transfers and the new additions, and it's just it's a group that you're gonna have to figure some things out. And I thought what Buford said earlier this week about how like they feel that in the secondary more than anywhere, that like they have so much depth, but they know that not everybody can stay. So like there's even more emphasis maybe on getting this thing right, because you don't want to let the wrong guys go. And they're going to let there's going to be some talented defensive backs that are going to go in the portal and end up somewhere else and probably be pretty good. And so at that position especially, it's going to be fascinating to see how Nebraska evaluates, how they balance kind of experience versus young guys, the talent, because there's just so many more options there. And I think maybe that's where you feel good about these decisions not being left to one coordinator, but also an associate head coach and also a position coach who's been a DC. And so maybe that's another area where a lot of this expertise really benefits Nebraska and what they want to do.
Agreed with that. I think that's probably where it's at right now. We haven't heard a ton about special teams. I'm okay with that. At some point this spring, somebody's going to say, well, obviously special teams is going to be better. We don't know that. And honestly, it's not because Eckler isn't doing a good job. There's only so many things you can control in special teams when it comes to snapping, punting, and kicking and returning. You have to be, the person who goes out there and does it. It's a wedge in your hand, and you got to put it on the green from 10 feet. It's very easy for us to say that a coach is going to affect that to that degree. I just don't know that we know that. You have to get the right guys, and then they have to have the right mindset, and then they have to go do it. The analogy I used in my rewind on Sunday, which is more like a preview, is I still cannot believe, and it was so cold, and you remember the Nebraska-Iowa game on Thanksgiving. I still can't believe that guy made that kick.
Twice.
I don't think I processed how far it was at the time because my hands were about to fall off. And so and it was a very long period of time there at the end of the game. Remember, there was a review and timeouts and all these other things. And I couldn't quite grasp how long the kick was. The crowd went nuts the minute he made it, the minute he kicked it. And I'm like, man, that must have been good all the way. It actually was only about this far inside the par. And I'm like, as I reflected on, I'm like, if I think about the air that night and the way it felt and how heavy it was, and there wasn't a lot of wind, how in the world did he make that kick? And Nebraska had blocked a bunch of kicks. Those are very hard things to do. That was a 132-yard wedge tucked, 2 feet from the pin. It was an unbelievable kick. And that same guy, the year before, got yanked from the Nebraska game because he got kicks blocked. Just can't predict it. It's too hard to predict. Alex Henry and Brett Maher were unicorns. They could kick and punt. They were unicorns. And Nebraska, it's almost like Nebraska's paying for having those two guys back to back. Because, the late Sam Foltz was a great punter. Drew Brown was a pretty good kicker. He wasn't a deep kicker, but he's a pretty good kicker. But they just have not had the level of excellence since Maher and Henry left, from a dual threat perspective. Again, Sam Foltz was a great punter. You just there's no way to know. And so I think people get kind of hung up there, and we have a tendency in the media to say, well, obviously they're growing and evolving, and it's always evolving. And you know what? Not every team evolves. Like, I do think they're going to be better on special teams, but I'm not going to say I know that. Not until they do it. It's like, you know,
Oh,
it's something you got to do first.
we've been burned many years where we say, oh, this is the year. Yeah, special teams going to make that turn. But like, even if the kicking is somewhat out of Heckler's control, and your analogy is a good one, the kicking piece to me is the interesting part. And like, they had some luck with blocking and things like that, blocking kicks, but like, can the return game maybe someday be an asset again? Or it is like, did that end when DeMornay Pearson out left? Like, did he have some sort of patent where Nebraska can't return kicks and be effective? Like, you see it all the time. Nebraska's been burned, giving up big kicks, like, and it's all magnified, right? Like, you talk about special teams, it's all magnified in a time now in this huge Big Ten where everyone's resourced and every game's close, and it's an NFL style that comes down to the last possession more often than not. So like, it's a discussion that's maybe not as um, headline worthy as quarterback talk or what the defensive scheme is going to be. But I mean, how many years have we talked about one or two special teams plays flipping two or three games? And I think that's as true as it's ever been, just in the climate that they're in right now. So if you can do what you've done in terms of blocking, find some sort of a returner in the kickoff or punt game, and your kickers do improve a little bit, like, that to me is one of the easiest ways to say, okay, Nebraska is going to go from 6 or 7 wins to 8, and maybe be playing more meaningful November football than they have. But
I think diving in with Eckler about how he has created such great return teams is something that we can talk to him about, because he does seem to have maybe some schematic things or technique things that he does that creates opportunity, because it's so much harder to return kicks and punts than it used to be. Punts for sure, kicks also. I do want to dive in with him on that and like maybe see if he's able to divulge any of his secrets, because I do think he's doing something unique in the return game. And that is something that I find very interesting. In kicking, again, I'm not trying to say that a special teams coordinator can't control some of the mindset stuff, but it really does come down, recruit the right guys. You got to have the right guys that are coming in. You know, if you get a punter and he's great for 4 years, man, that's gold. But there's no guarantee that like you're gonna scheme it up after he leaves. Bushini was good at times. He was not as good at times, and like Ed Foley was actually pretty good at dialing up fake plays. That was good. He was good at that. Like, if you're talking about, well, this is coaching, well, he dialed those things up. He made them. And they got 2 fake punts. They got one against Rutgers and one against BC. It was pretty sweet. He did a good job. The fake field goal wasn't as good, but you know that's coaching. But like you got to get the right guys, and then you got to get the right snappers. We had never seen a snapping issue like we did last year. So we'll see. But the return thing, I think Eckler can nail. Anything from Pro Day that was worth standing out about? Ty Robinson has moved up the mock draft lists. He's probably a day 2 guy now.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else that you heard? Or
yeah, I mean, we talked with Nash Hutmaker afterward. He's kind of the one that I was most interested to hear from. Combine snub, like, this was the day that was especially important to him, and I think he felt like he performed well in his the power bench press and some of the other things. I thought he seemed pretty encouraged by what he did. I think a lot of the guys did. I'm always interested in sort of the exit interviews that we have with a lot of these guys, because that's kind of what it is at Pro Day. These guys come back and have one last talk. And first of all, it's always interesting to see how much more relaxed guys are after they come out the other side of the Nebraska machine. So you hear guys speaking a little bit more candidly. But I thought what MJ Sherman said about, he was a former top national recruit out of high school, said if Nebraska had offered him as an 18-year-old, he wouldn't have flinched at that. Like, it just wouldn't have moved the needle for him at all. And now that he's come out the other end, he's like, thank God for Matt Rule and this staff for improving me and this place. And so I thought that was a pretty ringing endorsement from a guy who's played at Georgia and who's heard pitches from all over the place. So I think generally people were encouraged by their numbers. I will say too, it felt like we lost a lot of the real voices from last year's team. You think about like MJ Sherman was a thoughtful, interesting guy. Brian Buschini, I thought was an interesting guy. Nash, Thomas Fedoni was very candid oftentimes. So that kind of got me thinking about like who's going to be the next sort of soul of the team. Who's that guy who's going to say it how it is, how he sees it to be, because they had a lot of those guys and they lost a lot of those guys. I think it was Nash who said, or maybe it was Ty. I think it was Ty actually who said, "Man, he worked with Rule for 2 years. He said Nebraska is going to be a gold mine for talent now after guys have been working with them for 3 or 4 or 5 years." So we'll see. A lot of optimism. Like, what else are you going to say? But I did. I thought it was a relaxed pro day in the sense that like guys just kind of felt that relief that it was over. They've been training for months. Now we'll see what happens with the draft.
To be clear, like I think that the way that, and this is me just speaking objectively, I think the way that Matt Rule works with process and works with player development is older school, and it probably does make better players, just generally speaking. I think, yeah. So I understand what Ty Robinson is saying there. I absolutely do. I think it makes certainly better offensive, defensive linemen, linebackers, safeties, tight ends. Like if you come from that Matt Rule school, you're kind of hardened. You're kind of a grown man. You look things in the eye. I think that's all accurate. Yep. So I do think over time, when you're with him, you're probably gonna get closer to maxing out than you would have. I think in terms of what he's able to do there, he's very highly, touted. The thing that I'm watching going into this season is the dial on offense and defense. Like how much do you turn up the dial on offense? And in doing that, how much pressure does it put on the defense? And can the defense make plays that get them off the field? Because the way that Nebraska has run its system with Rule so far is it dialed down the number of plays that they're running. They're not running super fast tempo. It does protect the defense. That defense doesn't get as many hits, like it's like a pitcher. Snap count doesn't get so deep into the defense by the fourth inning or whatever. Torturing the analogy, but you understand what I mean. And I just don't think the dial has been high enough on offense. Like I think with Raiola, you got to dial it up. You got to turn up the dial, and you have to give a talented guy like that an opportunity to eat and go make plays and get in a rhythm early. And like, okay, we're going to come out. We're not moving NASCAR package, but we're moving NASCAR truck package. And we're moving quick, and we're getting the ball out here and here and here. And Dylan, we want you to get in a rhythm, and we're gonna do a shot call early, go route. We got Cortez Mills. We don't give a shit. We don't care that he's a freshman. We're going over the top, and we're going to impose ourselves on the opposing defense and let them know we're going to be here all day. And we're going to do this to you all day. And so we're putting you on notice that we're being that kind of team. When you do that, your defense has to understand commensurately, okay, we're going out onto the field and we are going to be, playmakers. Like we're going to get off the field and get the ball back to the offense so that they can overwhelm you. And I felt like the first year defense had the ability to do that. The second year defense struggled at times. They gave up big plays. They didn't always get off the field on third down. And so like how that dial shifts, like I would love to see the moxie on offense get turned maybe not up to 10. We're not asking them to be Joe Burrow, but get the moxie up to 7 or 8 and just be like, we don't care. We're gonna go and we're gonna put the gas pedal down, and we're gonna run you out of town. As you know, Evan, the formula has been body blows, body blows. We're gonna body blows in the middle of the ring. We're gonna play this thing for 3 quarters, and then we're gonna get to the fourth quarter. And what we're going to do is we're going to run for 100 yards, and we're going to win 24-17, and we're going to end the field. We're going to end the game on the field.
Yeah.
And we're going to boom, it's going to be, Bud Crawford kind of stalking you around the ring for 5 rounds, and then boom. I think with the Dylan Raiola, you got to dial it up. You got, let's just go ahead and be ahead 14-0. Let's just do that. Let's just do that. Let's just be cool with 7 minutes into the game, you're up 14-0 because boom, 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 3 and out, boom, 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 And that was kind of that was Frost's formula, but it just never worked out because the defense wasn't good enough.
I think of what Matt Rule said when he was talking about why they canceled the Tennessee series and why you wouldn't schedule strongly early in the season. He said really what it comes down to is how you're playing in November. And then he said, what it really comes down to is how your offense is playing in November. I think he recognizes what you're saying. And like, that's going to be the thing that makes the difference. And maybe that's part of why that defense needs that extra layer too. If the offense is sort of going to be unleashed in the Holgorsen era to do some of these things, I mean, you better have the other side figured out. Philosophically, like what you're talking about like let the offense go and the defense kind of can figure it out and be playmakers. I mean, isn't that what we talked about in the Scott Frost era? I mean, that's what that was.
It doesn't have to be turned up to 10. And like, they didn't get it done on the Scott Frost era. They didn't. That's very, very true. They did not have. They didn't have what they needed. That's a heck of a good point. I'm not saying turn it up to 10. Like I just think when Holgorsen took over, there was just a little bit more giddy up. And I just don't think it can look like UCLA. Like the UCLA game last year.
Agreed.
That was hard to watch. It was kind of hard to watch some of the Iowa game. Nebraska should have won that game. They controlled so much of the game. They just, you got to go get a play. Mm-hmm. And in that cold air, Dylan was ready to rock and roll, and Emmett was, and the line played well. You need receivers that can go do what needs to be done, and they just didn't get enough from the receivers. And we don't need to rehash that game. But the point being, because Nebraska's defense, outside of one play, played incredible football that night. And you would love to see Nebraska find a way to crank that offense up just a little bit. I'm not to a 10, but okay, we're going to come out and like I said, we don't care. We're not going to be afraid to go take a shot right away. And you saw it on the first drive of that game. Boom, take a shot, hit a shot, miss a shot, throw an interception. Well, that sucks. Turnover. Oh well, guess what? They survived. They survived it, like they did. They survived. They threw an interception on the first drive of the game. They had a lead at halftime, and the only way the Boston College was in that game at the end was because of the special team stuff. Nebraska survived it. And like that's what I mean. It's like finding a way not to do the dumb turnovers that they had in 2023 where guys are running into the backs of each other, whatever. Not that, but like being able to accept that you're going to be a little more aggressive. Again, you have the golden arm.
And I think you're looking.
You got this kid who can throw the ball a mile. Let him throw it a mile.
And I think you're seeing around the Big Ten, other teams agree with that. Like I think other teams are moving that way as well. I mean, Wisconsin made their coaching change a couple of years ago. I think with that in mind. I mean, Iowa, for the first time, looks like they might actually have a quarterback and that they can move the ball a little bit better. Minnesota, we'll see how they adjust. They've kind of been,
you don't much. If you've got Oregon on your schedule, you better prepare yourself. Or Ohio State, you have to prepare yourself for what you're going to do. Like you're not going to Again, Nebraska played a magnificent game against Ohio State, and they coached a magnificent game against Ohio State. Evan, they did.
Hmm.
They lost the game because Ohio State hit a couple of big plays, and Nebraska had to do it the old-fashioned way.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, Ohio State's goal line defense came up big over and over and over again last year, but that'll be the thing that I'm watching for. And just to see what like Holgerson's not coming here to run a ball control offense that gets 329 yards a game, and I mean he's here to improve the efficiency and execution and get this thing going. And sometimes in order to get that done, you have to say, all right, we're going to move it a little bit quicker tempo because our quarterback's smart and he doesn't need to run a play every 47 seconds. Quickly to baseball. Nebraska baseball went 3-6 on the road trip, got swept by UCLA, lost 2 of 3 USC, 1-2 from Pepperdine, and in a disastrous first inning, maybe one of the worst first innings defensively that Nebraska's had in some time. They lose 12-8 to Kansas State. Now, you were busy with football yesterday, so you weren't doing a bunch of stuff with that, but what's going on there? What? I mean, that was a rough inning. I was surprised they play. Like, were they just tired because they had not even been home or whatever?
Yeah, maybe. I mean, Will Bolt often says that when a team is struggling offensively, like the challenge is to not let that bleed over into your fielding. And I've actually, up until Tuesday, I've been impressed with how Nebraska's sort of been able to separate that. Like, as much as the offense has struggled, they've actually still been pretty solid in the
Right.
field, and that was not the case. And so I think it might have been a combination of that. You've been on the road, you've been in Pacific time for 10 days. You come back, you get on a bus ride 3 hours to go south to Manhattan, Kansas, and you fall behind and you're tired. Yeah, I could see how mentally you probably fall a little bit behind there. Certainly, Dylan Carey's been one of the better shortstops in the Big Ten, and he struggled for a couple of sequences there. Just the worst possible start for Nebraska, trying to find something positive, and you get Oregon State now this weekend, top 5 team, top 5 pitching staff in terms of earned run average. So I mean, there's not a break in sight. Creighton's been good; they're up after that, and then you're into the grind of the Big Ten. Rutgers has been good. Iowa's been decent at times. Those are teams that are coming up. So you got to figure it out. I mean, you're not quite halfway through the season. Your RPI's not where you want it to be. It's in triple digits. I've been on record as saying I still feel like this is the last weekend you can really get a big RPI jump if you were to make a move. And then after that, it's going to be really hard. Just looking at playing traditional Big Ten teams and your midweek schedule, like the at-large conversation for the NCAA tournament has diminished and is very close to being done, to where you're only talking about making the Big Ten tournament and making a run to continue things. Really disappointing, especially for an offense, again, that has so many guys back from last year's team. I mean, this isn't 2022 where they lost kind of the guts of their team and reset, and you thought maybe the culture would carry over. Like, this is largely, with a couple of key exceptions or key pieces who have left, like largely the same team that's back, and they just haven't been able to find it. So maybe coming home can help a little bit with that. But again, you're halfway through the season. You're kind of at the point where you are what you are, and they're still looking for lineup combinations and where guys can be defensively. It's a rough spot. I think it's one that they didn't expect to be in. I didn't expect them to be in. And the schedule is going to be really unforgiving. But I guess the positive side is you still have an opportunity because of that. And, we'll see how it goes. But certainly not what they wanted on the West Coast. And now you're really up against the wall with trying to make a run here.
That's a good word. We'll see what happens. Won't surprise. You know what? It will not surprise me if they win 2 against Oregon State. Just won't. Now, I don't think they're playing a game on Sunday. The weather is not favorable. Unless the rain stays away and it's 45 degrees. It's going to be rough on Sunday, so I wonder if it's going to be a Friday and then 2 Saturday games to get it in. It just won't surprise me. Oregon State doesn't really need it. And They're a better team for sure, but it just won't shock me. It's happened before where they've won series that you didn't think they would win because they're at home and they'll have a crowd. And yeah, won't surprise me if they lose 2 or 3-2. I do think they'll win at least one. I really do. Minnesota took one from Oregon State, all teams, Minnesota. So Nebraska could do it too. And I think they'll win at least one. And then, we'll see. I'll be curious if they get all three in. I know you're going to be out at the park. I don't know if you're going to be at the park Sunday. So this might be a Friday, Saturday kind of, weekend. All right. That is our Pick Six podcast for this week. We'll be back next week to talk about what Dana Holgerson and maybe Dylan Raiola and John Butler say. For Evan, I'm Sam. Thanks for listening.